George Blackman is the genius scriptwriter behind popular channels like Ali Abdaal, Mike Shake, Creator Booth, Noah Kagan, and many more. He's taken the process of crafting a viral video, which a lot of people just chalk up to luck, and turned it into a repeatable formula. A formula that you can learn. Today, George is spilling all his script writing secrets and basically handing you a blueprint for how you can write videos that blow up consistently one after another and grow your channel. So George, tell me about this idea of making your audience feel smart. What exactly does that mean and why is it important?
Yeah, that's such a good question. This is something that is really, really fundamental to a lot of, especially educational videos, but it's something that many people overlook. Because I think a lot of the time the instinct that people have is that they need to give the information as quickly as possible to reassure the audience that their click wasn't wasted. And while that is a good kind of morality to have, I guess, to a certain extent, the advantage and the joy of making YouTube videos and what makes the kind of style unique is that it's an opportunity to present the information that your audience, sure, could get from a blog post or could get from somewhere else online, but it's an opportunity to present it in a more engaging way. And so one of the kind of key examples that always falls foul of this not making your audience feel smart problem are with listicles, where you've got 5, 6, 7 points that you want to talk about. And the instinct is to start each segment by saying, step number 1 is you need to track your expenses or whatever it is. If we're talking like a finance video, where you're giving 7 tips for, running a better business or becoming a millionaire or whatever it is. Point number 1, track your expenses. The problem with that approach is that you're essentially giving them the answer right out the gate and then talking about the point you've just made for another 1 or 2 minutes. And that is a big problem because what the audience will start to feel after a while is, hey, I kind of got the idea that you were giving me from the headline. I need to track my expenses. I don't need to know anything more than that. I know how to do that. I know I'm maybe not doing it as well as I could, but I know that I need to be doing that. Spending 1-2 minutes then going into detail about, the easiest way to track your expenses is with Microsoft Excel and blah, 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 blah. It's like, as an audience member, that patience will start to wear thin and you'll start to feel like the creator is talking to you like you're not as intelligent as you actually are. And so the way to fix this, and thankfully it's a really simple fix, is just by flipping when you give that reveal to the end of the point. So rather than saying point number 1, track your expenses, you might begin the segment by saying something more like, it's really easy to feel like your finances are getting on top of you. This is something that, say, 80% of entrepreneurs struggle with in their first year, or maybe you open with something bigger. The biggest problem that 80% of entrepreneurs face in their first year is X. And now the segment is introduced in a way that gets me excited as a viewer and gets me interested and makes me feel personally seen. Because I think, my expenses are always my finances are always on top of me. What is the solution? And then as the segment starts to move on, it gives the audience time to start to figure out, the point they're going to make is probably going to be around expenses. So when that reveal comes, we're no longer wasting loads of time afterwards just discussing it. Instead, it's something that you start to think, I'm starting to see what they're doing here. I'm starting to see where this metaphor is leading. And by the time the reveal actually happens at the end, the audience feels smart because they're like, I figured it out. I guessed that. Rather than treating them like they're a bit silly, telling them the point out the gate, and then just needlessly extrapolate or talking about it afterwards for no real reason.
So I'm curious, do you think that a lot of the time it can be good to put the main point or that kind of, like that thesis statement for the point at the very end of the point where you talk around it, you give the examples, you talk about, the situation, the context, and then at the very end you say, so the first thing you really need to do is, and then say it and then move on to your next point? Or do you not normally do it that way?
No, that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's like it feels really unnatural to it's almost like a brief summary at the end where it's like, look, by the time we get to it, you've probably guessed it by now, but point number 1 is this. And then pretty much you can transition straight into the next thing. So like point number 1 is this, but that's going to be useless unless you know how to X, Y, Z. And that's how you then transition into the next point. So it's like it's not like a big impactful moment of, hey, this is what the point is, because you're kind of assuming, look, you're a smart person, you've probably figured this out by now, but just in case you haven't, this is the point I'm making. And then you immediately hook their curiosity again. This is useless until you know how to whatever. And that kind of stops you from dwelling too much on a point and having the audience member start to think like, I got it, I figured it out 10 seconds ago, let's just move on. That way you really do transition quickly into whatever the next point is and keep the curiosity there. Because actually, I mean, side point, that's the most important point to be aware of people losing interest is in those transition moments between points. That's the point where, you know, within a video, you might have 5 or 6 distinct points that you're making, or that essentially. But the conclusion of each point is kind of like the closing of a chapter, where unless you make it very obvious very, very immediately what the next thing they need to care about is, that is the point at which they, you know, like the YouTube symbol's just up there, I could click it and go back and I'm suddenly served another 500 videos that might be more interesting to me. So you need to really signpost very quickly, in my experience at least. Once one point concludes, what's the next one, and why does it matter to me as an audience member?
So let's shift gears now and talk about something a little bit more big picture, which is, what would you say are the top 3 differences that set apart the script of a YouTube video that gets millions of views from one that struggles to get any views?
This is potentially one of those things that people think there could be, like, is it a quick fix thing? Is there one particular thing that I need to do, or even 3 particular things that I need to do? But the tricky thing with YouTube, and what makes it quite a frustrating endeavor to some extent, is that there are so many little things that can impact how well a video performs. And as a scriptwriter, this is something I've come up against, where the impact I can have in terms of what I'm writing in the script can only go so far, based on what the actual video idea is in the first place. And so, like, I won't count this as one of the 3 things, because it's kind of technically outside my remit and outside your question. But the idea kind of underlies everything else. That's not where I tend to focus. The ideation is not really what I get brought in to do. But certain videos will have a view cap, a view ceiling, just based on what they are. But the thing is, like, that's not always a bad thing. It could well be that you are targeting a really, really niche subset of a particular, audience type, and you only need to get 20,000 views a video and convert 10% of those people to paying customers, and you've got a really, really solid business. And so that's kind of like the caveat that I like to add, is that the idea itself in many ways is the most important thing. But that's not necessarily a problem, because you don't have to be targeting million view viral bangers every single time. But in terms of the script, there are, I would say there are kind of, the 3 things which, say the idea is good, say the packaging is good, the title and thumbnail, you're happy with those. The 3 things that then, the next hurdle to get over is the script. And the first thing is, we've already kind of covered it, is the audience. So having a strong sense of who your audience is, having a proper audience avatar that you've got written down and that you feel like you understand, it is, underlies absolutely everything else. And in terms of my script writing system and like how I teach it to people, it's like it can feel boring to have to think about making an audience avatar. Like, there's nothing that sounds less fun to do than writing that down, but it's so important, and it'll make your life writing scripts easier, because it actually cuts off certain avenues that you might have when you're writing a script. So that's the first thing. Knowing who your audience is and having it really written down is point number 1. The next thing, again, it kind of flows from the audience avatar, but I think the hook is, like, obviously the first thing that people see. And that, again, relies on knowing exactly who your audience is. And a lot of this time, I feel like I can overcomplicate the stuff that I'm saying, but it really is quite simple when it's kind of broken down. It's knowing the audience and then showing that you know who they are in that hook. So if it's an educational video, it's showing that you understand, again, the fears, desires they have. And again, I talked about extenuating circumstances before. If we think of a hook for a video where, say it's a channel that's talking about fitness or something like that, 2 different channels could be targeting people who are in the same age range, who in theory would want to watch very similar videos. But if you are targeting someone who the reason they can't seem to get fit is because they have 3 kids and they're really busy all the time doing the school run, and it's more about trying to find time in the day to fit their exercise in. Like, knowing that about your audience member will massively impact how you set up the video in the hook. Whereas it could just be somebody else you're targeting on a different channel who doesn't have kids, but the issue is more down to motivation, and maybe they can't stop eating junk food or something like that, and there's more of a kind of psychological side to it. And again, that would mean you're going to set up the video in a completely different way. So again, all comes back to the audience avatar, but then using that information to inform how you set up your hook would be the second thing. And then the third thing is structure. So the number one thing that I've seen, and like I've reviewed hundreds of retention graphs at this point and spent hours and hours and hours and hours looking at this kind of thing, is when the audience member starts to feel lost within the overall structure of the video, they are much more likely to click away. So we already spoke about these transition points between segments in a video. That's one point where even if you've kind of enjoyed the segment you're watching, if you get to that next segment and you start to think like, where am I within this overall structure? Like, why did I click on this video? What am I ultimately going to find out by the end? That's a problem. And the way we can do that is often setting up really just after the hook or even during the hook, what the structure is going to be, or setting the expectation of either it's going to be 7 points, or this is my goal and these are the things that I need to do to achieve it, if we're talking like an entertainment video or something like that. So really clarifying early on and kind of reminding the audience throughout what the structure is so they never feel lost. That's another, the third and final thing that is paramount.
Okay, interrupting for just a sec to say, if you're watching this interview with George Blackman because you want to learn how to grow your YouTube channel, then I would love to invite you to watch my free masterclass, 3 Secrets to Reach 1,000 Subscribers in just 3 months. This is where I break down my strategy for growing YouTube channels as quickly as possible, even if you're starting at 0 right now. I'm going to explain to you exactly how the YouTube algorithm works and how you can work with it to grow your channel as quickly as possible. We're going to talk about how to get your video suggested and how to rank in search and which of those 2 things you should prioritize. I'll also be covering what the best call to action is for the end of every one of your videos. And surprisingly, this actually is not asking people to subscribe to your channel. So if you haven't already watched the masterclass, check the description for the link to sign up now. It's completely free, and it's also an on-demand workshop. So this isn't a live thing, it's pre-recorded, so you can just choose a time to watch it that is convenient for you. But just make sure you do find time, because I know it's gonna help you grow your channel. Okay, now back to George. Where do you start when thinking about how to frame up a video script? So when you're in those very beginning stages, before you're really writing, okay, you're just thinking about how you're going to put this thing together. What's the first thing that you think about? Is it the story arc, the main points, the hook, or something else?
My system for like doing all of this is kind of broken into five steps, essentially. The first is audience. I've spoken loads about that. I won't go into that again, but knowing who they are, that's point 1. The second step is kind of this free-form brainstorm type thing where maybe I have like a 1-sentence idea for the video, but I don't really know the direction it's going to go yet. But I essentially at that second stage, I'm just spamming down any ideas that could go into that video eventually. So maybe those will be specific points that I want to be in the video. It could be B-roll suggestions or things that like visually I'm picturing would go at certain points. It could be music choices, it could really be anything, but it's like a really free-flowing stage of the video. So that's the second step. Then the third step is bringing structure to it. So like we spoke about, figuring out what those individual points are going to be, what the transitions might look like between them. But ultimately then, at this point, we really need to solidify what the grand payoff, as I call it, of the video is. And the grand payoff is a tricky one because it doesn't, I think a lot of the time people would picture something bombastic or explosive that happens at the end that we're getting people, excited for and we're setting up in the hook. And but it doesn't have to be like that. It could just be the ultimate transformation we want the viewer to have felt by the end. And I think particularly with some of your audience, if we're talking, probably more on the educational side rather than the entertainment side, that's something really key to land on. Based on my audience avatar, based on all these bullet points that I've written down that could go into the script, what is that transformation that I am offering them and how can I clearly signpost that at the start? So that's the third step essentially, is knowing where you're going and what those key points that build up to that grand payoff are.
Could I interrupt you there and ask a question about your grand payoff?
Yeah.
So is this normally just like the main transformation of the video when we're talking about an educational video? So by the end of this video, I want them to understand, this how to do this big thing, or is it the like climactic point of the video, where if I think about a story, you know, normally we've got this build with the plot up to some sort of climactic point, and then we get out of there fast, right? Like you end the movie very quickly after that. Which sort of grand payoff are you thinking of here? The main transformation or an exciting climactic point of the video?
Yeah, it's a good question. It tends to be entertainment will be a big moment and education will be a transformation. There are some different examples where, for example, I've done some work with a guitarist YouTube channel, and the transformation has usually been achieved by, say, 70-80% of the way through the video. If it's a tutorial teaching the viewers a new guitar technique, that transformation has occurred 70% of the way through. But then sometimes he will end with just a performance where he's then showing this stuff all in action. And in theory, that subscribes more to the entertainment side of like, this is a euphoric kind of, you know, moment that I'm now getting to experience. So there's a little bit in the middle sometimes, but broadly speaking, for educational stuff, it tends to be the transformation is completed. They've understood whether it's the final step or whatever it is. They feel like they now understand what they clicked for, even if the last point in the video isn't something that is bombastic and crazy. It just completes that transformation step. So that's how I tend to think about it, yeah.
And so then moving on to the fourth step of your process.
Yeah, I mean, steps 4 and 5 are kind of, the upfront work has been done in steps 1 to 3. And that audience awareness is so baked in that all you have to do in the 4th and 5th steps, well, are as follows. Step 4 is just filling in the gaps. So you know now you've got your skeleton, you've got your structure. These are the 5 points. This is the grand payoff. And then it's just figuring out like, okay, I'm going to get from A to B and then B to C, C to D. But there's an element in step 4 where I'm thinking, again, like I'm not being too fussy about it. I'm not being too precious. I just need to get my thoughts down, because overthinking at that stage can, you know, you get analysis paralysis and you don't make any progress and it feels stressful and whatever. So just connecting the points, getting them to a draft 0, let's say. And then the 5th step is really where you're thinking more about retention. I really try not to think about retention anywhere before that final step. Getting draft 0 is by far the most important thing. Then it's going back through it and thinking, am I repeating myself anywhere? Are there any paragraphs that, and actually this is a really good test that I like to do, is sometimes if you read, say paragraph 1, skip paragraph 2 and read paragraph 3, have I lost anything by not reading paragraph 2? Am I losing anything in terms of information or like the weight of what I'm trying to say? That's a really good test for thinking, can I trim this down? And then you also have things like reading it aloud in that final step, just making sure that on the day when I sit down to film this, am I going to find out that this doesn't actually sound like me and it's awkward to read? So doing that before you sit down to actually record is important as well. But yeah, those are the 5 steps that I tend to go through.
Okay, and then my final question for you is just about pacing. You know, it's so important to keep the pace moving with the videos, to keep things moving along, keep people focused and interested. So what is the best strategy for just getting the pacing right, keeping the video moving? How do you make sure that happens?
Again, there's always this breakdown between entertainment and education. I'll briefly cover entertainment in case there's anyone who has those elements in your audience who want to know more about that. But I think one thing that I've seen, and I've never used this myself, but certainly working with some bigger YouTubers in the entertainment niche who, you know, have like millions of subscribers, a lot of them will have this kind of, it's like a graph almost, where they're thinking about how tense things are throughout the video, how fast we want things to be moving at a given point. And they all have a different way of doing that for their own channels. But if you can kind of templatize in your own head, okay, after the hook, we always want to have a kind of lull in tension because we've like hit them with loads of information at the start. Now we need to calm it down a bit. Then we ramp it up for whatever reason. Then we calm it down again. Then we ramp it up. That's something that I've seen being done, but it's not something that I've ever used. But I know that some of the bigger creators out there who are entertainment based kind of use this template every single time, which they've sort of formulated for their own channels. But in terms of educational stuff, I think a lot of it really comes back to figuring out your structure. So once you have those key mini payoffs that happen throughout the video in service of that grand payoff at the end, it's really about just making sure that you are constantly progressing through those points. So we already spoke about the idea of having to set up what the next payoff is as soon as you've paid off the last one. So like that's the first thing, is immediately setting up what the next thing is. then maybe we can have a bit of a lull where there's tension as we build towards that little mini payoff. So again, that'll be where you are drip feeding information to your viewer. You're maybe using a metaphor or something to kind of walk them through the topic in service of that mini payoff, which is where you then kind of reveal what point number 2 is, or the audience maybe has already guessed it as you've been drip feeding the information. I find repeating that structure, set up, tension, payoff for every segment of your video creates a kind of natural pacing shift where as you pay off the last bit of your previous segment, you go straight into the next one with the setup. That feels quite pacey, that feels exciting. You're highlighting the emotions they should be feeling. They get excited about the next point, and then you can dip off a bit, introduce a metaphor, hold their hand for a little bit, give them time to figure out what the next thing is, and then pay off the segment. Boom, transition into the next one, a little bit more tense again. That's really good in terms of how I think about it, set up, tension, payoff. But ultimately, you'll find your own style. And I think the interesting conversation with YouTube on the whole at the moment is kind of thinking about all of this stuff less and just enjoying making the content you're making and not giving the impression that you are templatizing everything that you're doing and making the audience feel like you're just having a conversation with them. And we're definitely seeing trends towards that side of things at the moment where people are kind of just backing off a bit and feeling more relaxed with the way they make content. And that might just be the style that you prefer. Ultimately, YouTube should be fun. So don't overthink it, I would say.
It seems like there is that trend going on YouTube right now where people are really preferring more kind of chatty, conversational type content, and they're kind of over the listicles.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, one channel that I'm really enjoying at the moment is a guy called Matt Mort, who's only got 4,000 subscribers, I think. But he's kind of been taking Twitter a little bit by storm with his style, which is essentially, he was like, okay, I'm 28 years old, I am 50K in debt, I've never had a serious relationship, still live with my mum, I'm going to sort my life out. And he just makes these fairly unedited videos of him just kind of going about his day, interacting with his friends, trying to get clients for his editing, trying out Deliveroo and Uber Eats and things like that on a bike. And it's so kind of raw and real, and it's like pleasant to just spend half an hour with him watching this guy trying to better himself. And I think even I'm thinking creators like Ryan Trahan, even though there is actually a lot going on behind the scenes and they are so tight with the way they cut everything together, the impression that's created is that you're just spending time hanging out with someone. And I think that's really, really doable in terms of business stuff as well. Because ultimately, you're just trying to create a connection with your audience and get them to feel like you see them and that you've been on a similar journey to what they're going on. And maybe the way to do that sometimes is actually to step back and to be a little less scripted and just to feel like you're having, a conversation like this where it's just a bit more unfiltered and real.
Yeah, I find that to be one of the trickiest things on YouTube these days is striking that right balance between being strategic with kind of how we are scripting the video, even if we're not writing, down every word or anything, but just how we are structuring the video and whatnot so that it has good pacing, so it has a good hook, all those sorts of things. And at the same time, having it come across quite naturally and conversational, and because that is relaxing and enjoyable to watch. It's a hard balance.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I guess that's also the joy of it as well, is that it's constantly evolving. What people want is constantly evolving, and what we want is always evolving as well. And so, yeah, like I said, just kind of, if you feel like it's getting stressful, try not to overthink it and just make content that feels good to you, essentially.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, George.
Cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Now, I hate to break it to you, but this was not my entire conversation with George, not by a long shot. We ended up speaking for nearly an hour about YouTube script writing for viral videos. But we wanted to reserve some of the juiciest parts for our students in our YouTube strategy program, Creator Fast Track. So what we ended up doing with the whole George Blackman interview was cutting it up into individual segments, each focused on a different aspect of viral script writing. Now, if you're interested in getting access to the entire conversation and, more importantly, learning how to grow your YouTube channel as quickly as possible, then here's what you can do. I am going to put a link in the description below where you can book a short call with me where we can talk about whether or not our YouTube strategy program might be the right fit for you. might be aligned with your goals for growing your channel. And if it is, I'll invite you to join the program. But either way, I'll give you the whole George Blackman interview just as a thank you gift for taking the time to get on the phone with me. If growing your YouTube channel is high priority for you right now, then I'd love to talk with you about how to make that happen. So make sure you check the description for the link to book that call with me.